Good afternoon. My name is Father Ken. I'm coming to you again this week with some food for thought on the readings for the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The gospel this week is the famous story of Martha and Mary, and I'm convinced that if I were to devise some kind of survey amongst Catholics or Christians in general to list their least favorite readings, I think this would be on most people's list. Why? Because the way we tend to read this story of Martha and Mary in the Western world is that we favor Martha. Martha is the workaholic. Martha is the one getting things done. Mary doesn't seem to be helping her in this story where Jesus is the house guest. Mary is sitting at his feet, listening to him, fully attentive to Jesus, and seemingly leaving Martha to take care of everything. And Martha comes to Jesus pleading for help, asking if he would just talk to Mary and tell her to help. And instead, it seems that Jesus kind of scolds Martha, saying that Mary's chosen the better part. And so for a lot of us, we struggle with that. But I think part of the reason is we read this story in isolation. If you just read it by itself, you sort of have no option but to contrast the active life versus the contemplative life, let's say, and considering the merits and the demerits of those two ways of life. But recently, I've taken several trips to wine country, to Central Washington for a family wedding. In my retreat, I was up in Willamette Valley and been to a conference in Napa Valley. I used to live there for a time, and to some degree here in Southern Oregon, we're becoming wine country. I thought to myself, a wine term as applying to this week's readings, that is pairing. You know, if you enjoy a good glass of wine with a fancy dinner once in a while, you understand, if you've ever had any experience tasting wines, that, you know, we need to put some thought into what wine to pair with the food we're preparing to enhance the flavors that we're preparing, right? I hope you all regularly read Scripture, but not everybody reads Scripture according to the liturgical cycle. If you did this week, it would be what I would argue a good example of pairing. How you can read the story differently if you pair it with another tale. In this case, the reading that I have in mind is our first reading, in which Abraham is in the desert. He's in the region of Mamre, and three strangers come and visit him. We're told really from the language it's written in that Abraham has a good sense that he's experiencing a theophany, an experience of God's presence coming to visit him. It's kind of a foreshadowing even of the Trinitarian doctrine, because this presence of God comes to him as three persons, and he instructs those three persons to help themselves to the banquet he's preparing, plural, but it also speaks of the Lord visiting, singular. And at one point he confronts these three visitors and addresses them as sir in the singular. So it's a in and of itself kind of a mystical foreshadowing of the Trinity. But the important detail when we pair these readings side by side is this: rather than comparing Martha to Mary, we have an opportunity this week to compare Martha to Abraham. Why? Because they're both engaged in the work of hospitality, which was a very important quality in the Middle East, in the desert. Many scholars have pointed out that in the desert, hospitality may be at certain points a matter of life and death. You know, maybe I didn't bring enough water on my journey. Maybe I lost some water. Maybe I was waylaid by robbers or beasts or something like that. And finding a place to provide sustenance for me in such a state might mean the difference between me surviving or not. And who knows, a month from now, maybe you can return the favor when I'm in a desperate situation. So hospitality was something always emphasized. But I think when you put these two stories up side by side, you see an interesting contrast. Both of them are hosting God for dinner, which none of us can say we've had that experience. But there's a difference, actually. They're both pulling out all the stops. They're both, it seems like, doing their very, very best. Abraham sacrifices one of his prized steers, and he is pulling everything out of the pantry that he can to put on a kind of Thanksgiving banquet right in the middle of the heat of the day, on very, very short notice. Martha sounds like she's doing something similar. But when you consider them side by side, what seems to be the big difference is that Abraham never shifts his focus from the three visitors. He is locked into their well-being, their sense of being welcomed. He's hanging on their every word. And that is where Martha is going astray. I would argue that she is in somewhat of a scatterbrained state of mind. That's what I'm calling this talk, scatterbrained, because she seems more caught up in the tasks that she has to do. And you can see the bad fruit that comes from that. Her heart gets hardened toward her sister. She gets in this bitter, foul mood. She is doing the work for the Lord, but she's forgetting the Lord of the work, and it's stealing away her joy, and it's kind of putting her in a vulnerable state. So this week, I bring this idea forward. It seems like a simple idea at first when Jesus dismisses her concern by saying that Mary has chosen the better part, that she has focused on the one important thing, which is living in his presence, and Martha has forgotten that. But what I've been sharing this week with our congregation is there are a number of examples like that in our spiritual warfare, in our battle with the enemy, when he wants to steal away our salvation, when he wants to put us in a state of mind such that we are sort of like a game piece taken off the board, that we're no longer available to God's grace to be used as an instrument for his work. We're like a missionary taken out of the vineyard. There's a short list, but just to mention a few, one of them is joyfulness. You know, if we were to be living our faith in a sourpuss kind of formal, stoic, standoffish, unemotional way, it's a very unattractive way to live. It makes us unable to evangelize. Chris Stefanik, one of the keynote speakers of the conference I was at in Denver, said that Satan is terrified of a joyful Christian. So that's one thing. If Satan can coax us into a constant state of depression or a kind of an empty, formalistic, legalistic way of living our faith, it's right where he wants us to be. Makes us ineffective. Another one is if we allow ourselves to be overcome by fear. Just think of the apostles hiding in the upper room before Pentecost. They weren't of any use to the Lord in those days. Or I think of the image of Peter being invited to step out of the boat. For a moment, he's walking on water. But once he sees what he's doing and once he's overcome with fear, he falls. Fear has the capacity of paralyzing us. It shakes our trust in the goodness of God and makes us a weak instrument. So that's another one. If Satan can push us toward fear. Another one is, as C.S. Lewis, I think, pointed out, Satan would love to convince us that he doesn't exist at all, or to just get us in such a lukewarm state of mind that we were unmovable. I think of God expressing through the angel in Revelation, how I wish you were either hot or cold, but since you're lukewarm, I spit you out of my mouth. You know, he's saying in that moment, I wish you hated me rather than think nothing of me, that it would be better if you loved me or hated me, hot or cold, than nothing, than none of the above. You know, in that case, how does God move us to action when we don't really have that heart for it? There are other examples like that when we take our mind off the ball. That's sort of in line with this story today to me. I think a lot of people can recognize that getting your mind filled with too many ideas, too many thoughts is not healthy. And I usually notice as an administrator, as a pastor, that I'm getting like that when I misplace things. You know, when I spend 5 minutes looking for my glasses and I realize they're on my head, or I keep leaving my car keys in a doorknob somewhere, or I misplace them because I'm overloaded with things. So on a practical level, it starts to affect our productivity, it also affects our mental health. When we live in a prolonged state like that, you know, your blood pressure can go up, your stress levels go up. It's not good. But what I want to convey to you today is that it's also a spiritual problem. Think of one of the classic letters in Screw Tape Letters, if you've ever read, from C.S. Lewis. It's a picture of spiritual warfare from the side of the demons. And it's just a series of exchange letters between a low-level demon and middle management demon as they're trying to undo this British man's salvation. And one of the letters that I recall very clearly, the middle manager says that the key is keep them distracted. If our enemy can fill our head with so many thoughts that we don't know which way is up, it's essentially equivalent to noise pollution. So it actually forms a spiritual problem on two different levels. On one level, it makes it extremely difficult or near impossible to hear the voice of the Good Shepherd. That is immensely damaging. Why? Because that's how I discover my vocation. The word vocation comes from the word vocalization or vocals or voice, where God is speaking. He's trying to lead me to my true calling, my central purpose of my existence. And if my head is full of distraction, I can't hear it. It affects my sight too, if you will. I've been talking with our staff recently, the last couple of weeks, of the importance of interruptions. The ninth beatitude, I've called it for several decades, that, you know, I have a list of tasks I think I need done. I'm convinced they're important. And if I let those things fill up my head so much, I can walk right past a person in need, or shortchange them, or only half listen to what they're saying, not really giving them my full attention. I've discovered over the years that the most important moments of my day are those interruptions. And it's rare that one of them takes even more than 5 minutes. It might be 2 minutes out of your day. But if you can give your full attention to those 2 minutes, undistractedly, you can change a person's week or a person's month or a person's life even. We have many examples that we've shared with our staff just in stories. But secondly, I think it poses a threat in that when we're distracted, our sense of peace is taken from us. Our ability to pray, really. It's Mother Teresa of Calcutta who used to say that the fruit of silence is prayer. This is how we connect heart to heart with the Lord. And if we can't calm our mind, we really can't do that very well anyway. I try to urge people who really struggle with stress to first take about 5 minutes in the Adoration Chapel and just breathe and just listen to your heartbeat and clear your head before you start to pray. And it will increase the likelihood that your prayer will be more fruitful if you do that. But it starts with kind of quieting that inner voice. This is extremely hard. Some people, just by nature of their personality, are more prone to stress. This pandemic has amplified people's trouble with stress, I feel, to the point where I think this is currently our number one problem. For me, if I know a source, if I turn on the news in the evening, I see all of these examples and all these kind of troubling stories that seem to suggest that the world's unraveling. And suddenly I feel my peace leaving me. I feel my joy leaving me. And suddenly it's like a 100-headed snake coming at me. I don't know where to begin to resolve the problem. This is terrible because it gives us a Martha mind. We start to then get bitter and frustrated and judgmental toward others, just the way she did. Look how quickly she turned on her own sister. That is bad. Let me add a specially highlighted side chapter on this. I'm convinced this is one of the major things, regardless of your personality type or the kind of work you do as well. That is technology. I'm not an expert. I would defer to a medical person, a psychologist, or an educational expert. But my general understanding is that growing up as a child, the class schedule at school was structured such that every class was 45 or 50 minutes long, for the specific reason that that was the estimated length of time of the average kid's attention span. So the school day was structured around that, just to optimize productivity. Something in our culture has changed immensely, though, since that time. I've read from multiple sources that the estimated attention span of an adult today is around 2.5 minutes long. And you can see indications of this everywhere. For instance, turn toward your average news source, and in addition to the talking head on the screen, there will also be a scrolling bar underneath giving news updates, and there'll be another subsection of news on the side that your mind can jump to back and forth if you get bored. So it's just a complete inundation of data because the estimate of how long we will stick to people is really a low bar. This is also true with internet. When you see pop-up advertisements, video games, just the pace at which stimuli and action come. If you've ever been to a movie theater in recent years and watched an action movie, it's just one thing after another every few seconds. I guess because they fear we'll just drift off in our attention. That's not a good sign. If our culture, if our society has brought us to that, as a group, as a community, it becomes extremely difficult to hear well and to be open to the Lord. So a scattered mind is a problem. Bishop Robert Barron's pointed out that the word diablo or diabolical, related to Satan, I guess the root has to do with the verb to scatter. If Satan can keep us distracted, if he can keep our mind scattered, then we are no longer in the game. So let's really take that to heart this week. When we calm down, when we slow down, we're not just giving ourselves the benefit of a calmer, better, healthier way of living. We're actually removing a spiritual threat. So the next time you're feeling stress, tell yourself, this is the time I need to stop and pray so that I can really not miss those opportunities God's sending my way. Then in those little moments of interruption, we will be ready to respond more effectively. I hope you will clear your head and consider these words that I have for you this week. Blessings on you, and tune in next week where I have some more thoughts for you. God bless.